Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Mike's Monday for the new year. I hope everybody had a good Christmas and a nice new year. Today's session, we've got the Director of Compliance, Steve Hardwick, here, graced us with his presence. So if you've got any questions for Steve throughout, we can hopefully answer those. Today's session, I'll just share my screen with you all. It is in relation to what to expect for a AML inspection. A lot of people on the previous Mike's Mondays have emailed me asking me what they can expect, and as promised, we do a session on that now. I'll go through the basics of why people are selected for an inspection and what to expect, what I expect, etc. And as always, if you want to ask some questions at the end of the session, that's great. If not, again, as always, just drop me an email and I'll get back to you with any queries at all in relation to it. So as always, it's all about unmasking the money launderer, trying to identify those people that are trying to get their ill-gotten gains into the banking system and using you as a conduit in order to do so. So what to expect if you're inspected? First of all, I'll say it's nothing to worry about. Don't worry about it. A lot of people, and it's easy for me to say, I know, to say don't worry about it, but a lot of people will worry about it. They think they're going to be inspected and check what they're doing or not doing, but don't worry about it. As I keep saying throughout this process and throughout these Mike Mondays, we're there to help you to get through this, just to make sure that you are compliant. So first of all, why inspect members? Well, to ensure compliance with the legislation, to ensure you're complying with the legislation, and to ensure that ICB are compliant with their statutory obligations, what they're required to do as a supervisory body. Compliance with ICB rules and regulations, to prevent criminals laundering money, to identify offenders, people that may wish to launder money through your practice. And if you get a knock on the door from law enforcement, so you know what to do, you know that all your systems are correct and in place. And if you are one of those people that happens to get a knock on the door by law enforcement and they're asking you the questions about the legislation, you're in a good position that you'll know what to say, and that all your records are complete and in place. And again, it's all about, and I know I harp on about this every week, it's all about protecting your reputation and your livelihood. You work really hard to get your business to the success they're at. Make sure that you comply with the legislation, and then you won't fall foul of this. So the question often asked when I contact people for an inspection is why me? Well, how are members selected? Well, it's all done on a risk-based approach. It's not a case of us inspecting all members. It's a case of having a look what the risks are to try and identify those members that may not be conforming to the legislation. But equally, it may be that if we see that we believe that some members are fully conforming to the legislation, they may be inspected just to check our risk-based approach is working. So you may be selected because we've seen some information or intelligence in relation to your practice that it may not be conforming. Some research that our intelligence officer Jane Hardwick completes that may indicate that you may not be conforming to the legislation or ICB rules of membership. Any complaints that may come in relation to your practice may prompt an inspection. Whistleblowing, if anyone was to contact the whistleblowing line in relation to your practice, could prompt an inspection. And forums, if there's any material on forums that may suggest that either your practice may not be conforming to the legislation, that's another avenue that inspections may originate from. Also, Jane Hardwick will analyse AML online and the risk rating reports on there, and those not complying and those that change the risk rating. So if you've not got all your clients on AML online, or you're changing your risk ratings from a high risk client, change them to low risk without the correct rationale as to why you've done that, that could prompt an inspection. If you've got a lot of high risk clients, it may prompt an an inspection to see if you're doing enhanced due diligence on those clients. If you're providing the services of a trust or company service provider, again, another high risk product that bookkeepers can offer. And again, it comes with high risk. So again, you may be inspected to check that you are doing the necessary due diligence. And staff and client ratio. Sometimes we'll see that a member may only have half a dozen, 10 clients on AML Online, but have 5 or 6 staff listed. And the client staff ratio doesn't seem right. Have you got more clients that aren't on AML Online? So that could prompt that inspection. And database cleansing in relation to my ICB, it's inaccurate. Sometimes we'll look on your record and it's out of date. There's documentation out of date. There's certain documentation that should be there that isn't there. And again, that could prompt me being asked, or one of the other inspectors being asked to complete an inspection. Also, Jane will do a search of Companies House and further internet research in relation to your practice. Sometimes we'll identify that a practice license has been issued to a member who have said that they're a sole trader, when in fact, when Jane will look on Companies House and it'll indicate that you're a limited company. And again, what that shows is that you're technically practicing without a license, because ICB have authorised you to practice as a sole trader when in fact you're a limited company. And some members will move up from being a sole trader up to a limited company, and for whatever reason fail to notify ICB. We're finding nothing malicious in that. It's just that they've forgotten to notify ICB, but it's so important that you do, because technically you're practicing without that license. No DBS certificates for other members of your limited company. If you've got a limited company, you're acting as a trust and company service provider. You can identify off Companies House that you may have clients registered to your business address, which would indicate that you're acting as a trust and company service provider. And we'll check the trust and company service provider register, and we'll see that you may not be on there. So again, that's in fact illegal. So again, that's another reason why you could be inspected. Or the person with significant control of your limited company is not yourself, it's somebody else, another third party that we're unaware of. And again, that could prompt that inspection. Also, we'll look at filings in Companies House to see if what the filings are, what the accounts that have been filed with Companies House, to make sure everything seems right. And if there's anything that doesn't seem right, again, it will prompt, or could prompt, that inspection of your practice. So how and when will I be notified of the inspection? Well, I'll make a telephone contact with the practice identified and arrange a suitable time to come and see you. In the current climate, that will be over Zoom due to not being able to visit practices in person, but hopefully in the future we'll get back to face-to-face inspections. But at the moment in time, that will be done via Zoom. And the inspection should be completed within 14 days of me contacting you to do that, to arrange that inspection. And I know, as it says there, in exceptional circumstances, that can be extended, but ideally it should be completed within 14 days of that initial contact. I'll then send you an email detailing the appointment, and on that email it'll detail all the information on there that you need to know in relation to that inspection. I'll put on there a link to the ICB website where you can find all the information that tells you what you should be doing to be compliant. I'll then send you Zoom joining instructions on the day of the inspection. And should you wish to cancel the inspection appointment, a reasonable explanation should be provided, and a new appointment should be made that is within a reasonable time scale and no longer than 14 days. So ideally, keep to your appointment if you've contacted, but we can extend it in exceptional circumstances if, and that's on the say-so of Steve Hardwick. So what will what will I expect from yourselves, and what will you expect from me in relation to it? So I'll expect an understanding and compliance with the legislation and obligations of the money laundering regulations, an understanding compliance with ICB membership rules, that all your clients are on AML Online, up-to-date risk assessments for all clients, and a whole of firm risk assessment for your practice, Be able to explain the risks associated to the sector your clients work in. So if you've got a client that works in a particular sector, I'll be asking you what the risks are of that sector in relation to your client, and have a look at your whole of firm risk assessment to see if it's duplicated on there, to make sure that you're identifying the risks and also mitigating the risk, more importantly. Be able to explain the business activities of the clients. Quite often I'll do inspections and I'll speak to members, and I'll say, well, what does that client do? And sometimes they'll come back to me and not really understand the business relationship they've got, or what the business actually does. If you don't understand the business, as I've said on previous Mike's Mondays, if you don't understand the business, you can't identify the risks thoroughly enough to be able to mitigate them. Completion of compliance policy and procedure statements and an annual review checklist, which also should mitigate any risks that you've identified. And DBS checks for all business owners and office managers, as again, I've gone into detail in relation to that on previous sessions. And CDD present on examination of client files, including ex-clients. And that includes sole traders, and that you've identified all the directors of your limited companies and persons with significant control, and that you've done all your due diligence in relation to those. And as I say, I will also look, as will the other inspectors, at your ex-client files, because you've got to keep your client files for 5 years at the end of your business relationship. So it's just not just about seeing your current clients. Let's have a look at your ex-client files to make sure you've kept that information as well, because that's what you could be asked for by other parties. So some of the issues that have been identified when we've been doing the inspections: members not complying with their requirements under the money laundering regulations or the Proceeds of Crime Act, that's in relation to suspicious activity reports; not carrying out client risk assessments online. Regularly that's happening, where people aren't putting all their clients onto AML Online; not inputting all or any clients onto AML Online, or any clients onto AML Online. Now this is important, because you need to have all your clients onto AML Online, because that automatically risk assess them, and also you can't do your whole of firm risk assessment until you've got all your clients on AML Online, so you can see what the risk is to your practice. And no policies and procedures in place or a whole of firm risk assessment, or sometimes it's called a practice risk assessment. It's so important that you have policies and procedures in place to combat and mitigate any risks that you've identified. And I'll be asked to see those policies and procedures and that risk mitigation as part of the inspection. Lack of basic AML knowledge, not aware of what a PEP is, not aware of what a SAR is. And again, on the email that I send out to you to say I'm coming to do the inspection, if you follow the links on that email, which I'm finding a lot of people aren't doing, if you follow the links on that email, it will take you to the ICB website, where all the information is on there that you require. No staff training or training records, which is a requirement of the legislation. Not complying with the regulation 26, which is a DBS certificate. We're still seeing that, where people have not provided a DBS certificate for themselves, or anybody, a manager of the practice or other directors of the limited company. And CDD is lacking in many cases. That is a big one at the moment, where lots of people aren't completing the required due diligence in relation to their clients. And not knowing how many clients you have. One of the first questions I'll ask you, I'll know prior to the inspection and on the day of the inspection how many clients you've got on AML Online. I'll ask if that's the amount of clients you've actually got. And I'm amazed at how many people don't actually know how many clients that they've got. And again, if you run your practice properly, I would expect to ask you how many clients you've got. I've got 26 current clients. I've got 56, whatever the number may be. Not keeping ICB profile up to date, very important. Quite often I'll be given an inspection to do, and then try and contact the member on the telephone number that's on their ICB profile, and it's an old number. It doesn't go through to them. Fortunately, I've been able to get numbers off websites, etc., to contact the members. It's so important that you keep your ICB profile up to date with your staff, any staff that you've got, your email address and your contact telephone numbers, etc. And ask that if you all review that to make sure it's all up to date. Not knowing how to log on to AML Online. Again, I've gone on to inspections and asked members to go onto AML Online, and they don't know how to do it, and they've not been on there for a number of years. It's so important that you go onto AML Online, get your clients on there. Able to explain what due diligence is required, but not reflected in the DIP sample of client files. So we'll go through what due diligence is, and great, a lot of people will be able to explain that for me, but it's not reflected. A lot of people will know what to do, but they're not doing it. And again, it just takes you closer and closer to failing an inspection. Not having met clients face to face and relied on copy ID documents provided by the client and not certified. How do you know the person that you're dealing with is that person? You've never met them. You receive the documents through the post or via an email, then they haven't been certified. In the current climate with Zoom, it's the ideal time to do this. You can do a Zoom meeting with your client. They can hold the passport up. You can see it's them, and they can perhaps get a copy of it sent to you then. There are ways around this, even in the current circumstances. Not knowing how to use Companies House to check information in relation to person with significant control. Again, that's your bread and butter when you're taking on a corporate entity as a client. Companies House gives you lots of information about that client. Have a look at the filings, have a look if what they're telling you is correct. All forms part of your due diligence. And again, if you haven't done something, don't try and hide the fact. Be honest. I've come across a couple of things recently where people have tried to hide the fact that they haven't done something because they think it's better if they don't admit that they haven't done it. Honesty is the best policy in relation to this. If you've not done it, just tell me. We'll get it sorted out. We'll get you through the inspection, rather than me finding out a little bit later down the line that you've not been truthful. It has further implications. So reasons for people not being compliant. This is some reasons what people give us, not just me, the other inspectors and the Director of Compliance as well, as to why they've not been compliant. Some of them may be valid, some of them may not be. First one, I don't have any time for all this AML stuff. Well, you need to make time for it. I appreciate, and I really do appreciate that you're busy running your businesses and building these businesses up, but this is the one that'll knock you down if you don't get it right. You've got to make time for it. My kids have been sick, my dog's been sick, my husband's been sick. I've been too busy to keep on top of my AML. I've got clients to look after. Again, my answer to that is, if you don't get this right, you might not have any clients to look after, because you've got to get it right. And there's no excuse for not getting it right, because we're all there to help you to get it right. This has been a wake-up call for me. They'll get the phone call from me and then realise they've not been doing what they should have been doing. They've known they've not been doing it, and it's been that wake-up call, which is great. Let's get your house in order. Money laundering doesn't happen to people like me. Well, for those of you that have listened to previous Mike's Mondays, you'll see that it does happen to people like you, and to ICB bookkeepers and other supervisory body bookkeepers as well. Criminals don't use small bookkeepers like me. Again, as some of the sample cases I've used back end of last year show that they do. I've known my clients for years, they wouldn't do that. Well, I'm afraid that they will do that, and I've given you examples in the past of that. I didn't know I had to do it. I really find that hard to believe, with all the emails that go out from ICB explaining in relation to this, all the Mike's Mondays, the summit, etc. There's lots of information out there in relation to it, and I do find it hard to understand that when people say they didn't know they had to do it. I knew I had not done it, but I thought I would wait for an inspection. You could tell me what to do. Yeah, by all means, I will tell you what to do. But at the end of the day, the responsibility is yours to do it. Don't wait for me to tell you what to do. Do it yourself. Then when I come to inspect you, what I'm looking for is for you to be compliant when I inspect you. It may be that you've not been compliant prior. That's why you've been selected for an inspection. What I'm looking for is for you to be compliant when I inspect you. So don't wait for me to come to tell you what to do. What's the chances of being inspected anyway? Well, very high, in fact. As you'll see later, the inspections have ramped up over the past 12 months, even though we've been doing them via Zoom, and it's not as many as perhaps we should have been doing. But there's every chance you've been inspected. But again, don't wait to be inspected. This is legislation that you need to conform with. You need to be doing this, protect yourself, protect your business, etc. As I said before, you've worked hard to get these successful businesses. Don't let this be the downfall of them. So the outcome of the inspection, the ICB AML compliance inspection program to determine if a practice is compliant with the money laundering regulations. Initially, it was 3 ratings. It was compliant, generally compliant, and non-compliant, and there was a partially compliant rating as well. However, as of this year, the generally compliant rating has gone. We're just going to have compliant or non-compliant. And OPBAS, who supervises ICB, requires consistency in the inspection process, and asked us this question: what is the difference in generally compliant and compliant and non-compliant, and who decides and under what rationale? And they sampled some inspections and found the lines to be blurred, very subjective. I could find somebody compliant and somebody else could find them non-compliant. To me, that's not fair. You're either compliant or you're not compliant. Again, as it says there, very subjective. It'll be clearer. A practice will either be complying or not. Make it easier for the inspections and easier for people to understand. I have had it in the past where I've told somebody that they're non-compliant, and they'll ask me, well, can't I be generally compliant? Because well, now there's no generally compliant there to choose from. And this is a compliance inspection form. I'll complete a form. The inspectors will complete a form as we're going through the inspection, and then at the end of the inspection, you'll get a summary. This will be sent to you, just details of the practice there. Do you have a full understanding of legislation, proper procedures, proper records? Is the process ongoing? And there's a series of questions down there which you can look at your leisure in relation to whether you've got them or not, whether you're compliant with certain aspects of the inspection. This will be amended, this form, because it's still got on the form the generally compliant box. That, as I said before, will be gone. And then any required actions for those of you that are non-compliant, any required actions will be inputted in the box there with a completion date put in there for you to complete. A series of 6 questions there to making sure that you understand what the inspection and the outcome of the inspection was, and a comments box as well for any comments you wish to make in relation to the inspection, good or bad, any way that you think you can improve it, or if you disagree with any aspects of the inspection and what's on there. So the outcome of the inspection, as mentioned there, you're either compliant, generally compliant has gone, or non-compliant. And post-inspection, if you're compliant, you'll receive a copy of the summary I've just gone through with you there, which is to be signed and returned to the inspector. Again, I ask you that you do that. At the moment, I'm finding that lots of members aren't returning those signed forms, which I need to take on to the next stage of the inspection process. So that needs to be signed and returned. If you're compliant, confirmation will be forwarded to the member from ICB that they're compliant following the inspection, so you'll receive notification that you are compliant. Again, that just shows that you're compliant at that moment in time. Don't let things slip. Continue with your compliance, and then hopefully you won't be selected for another inspection. If you're non-compliant, you'll receive a copy of the summary, again, as stated there, which again must be signed and returned. It'll contain details of the actions required to be compliant with the completion date. And I'll agree with you, a completion date. There are time parameters in relation to the completion of these, but I'll obviously take into account any factors that you may have, which may limit the completion within a certain period of time. But that has to be done within that date, if not before. And again, following completion of the actions, there'll either be a re-inspection, which will take place, or confirmation by the member that the actions have been completed. Dependent upon what actions are required, depends on whether you have to be re-inspected. If I inspect you on the first inspection and you've got no due diligence, in relation to any of your clients or some of your clients, you haven't got proof of ID, etc., that will require a re-inspection to be made, another Zoom inspection, so I can see that documentation. In relation to some other things, I may just ask you to email me to say that the actions have been completed and you're compliant. And with those, I'll take your word for it in some instances. In other instances, I'll dip sample to make sure that that things have been completed. Again, confirmation will be forwarded to the member that they're compliant following the inspection in relation to that. So the National Risk Assessment 2020 was released. I think I touched on this towards the end of last year. It was released on the 17th of December 2020. We're going to have a separate session on Mike's Mondays, Steve and I, in relation to this to show you what the extra bits and pieces are in relation to it. But that was released, and they are still saying that accountancy services are a high risk to money laundering. Overall, the risk of money laundering through accountancy service providers remains high. The risk is highest where accountancy service providers do not fully understand the money laundering risks and do not implement appropriate risk-based controls. Accountancy service providers remain at risk of being exploited or abused by criminals, especially if accountancy service providers become complacent in their regulatory obligations under the money laundering regulations or willingly facilitate money laundering. Now, that is reflected in our inspections, unfortunately. And I've got some inspections here from 2019 and last year as well, 2020. 2019, we did 85 inspections. 26 were compliant, 23 were generally compliant, and 36 were non-compliant. And if you just compare that with 2020, we did 117 inspections last year, 16 were compliant, 34 were generally compliant, and 67 were non-compliant. As you can see, well, if we could do away with that generally compliant there, you'd have had 101 non-compliant versus 16 of being compliant. So unfortunately, members still are not understanding the requirements of their obligations on the money laundering regulations. And it is so important, and I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but those that are listening to me on here, I don't know, but just make sure you conform to the regulations, because unfortunately those figures do show that the vast majority of people are not complying with the regulations and being found non-compliant. So in summary, understand your obligations in relation to legislation, ICB rules on membership, and comply with them. If contacted for an inspection, all the information is provided in the confirmation email, which if followed and not already compliant, you should be at the time of the inspection. So the information is there. So if you're not compliant, when I phone you, there's no reason why you shouldn't be compliant by the time I do that inspection, or one of the other inspectors does the inspection, because the information is there. And if you're still not sure, ask. As I keep saying all the time, we're here to help. I don't see my role just as an inspection to see whether you're compliant or not. It's part of the ICB wider team with Sujay with the onboarding in relation to AML, and to ensure that you don't fall foul of the legislation, and that ICB carry out their statutory duty to do these inspections. But also, as I say, for want of boring you, as I said before, I'm approachable, I'm contactable, as a lot of people have already contacted me on the back of these, on the back of inspections and on the back of Mike's Mondays. But feel free to drop me an email and I'll contact you, and we can go through anything that you don't understand, and ultimately get you to where you need to be and protect that business that you've worked hard to build up. And as always, don't forget, you're not just an ICB bookkeeper, but don't be judged by your failures. That should have been, don't forget, you're not just a bookkeeper, you're an ICB bookkeeper, but don't be judged by your failures, because we will. In all walks of life, you're only as good as your last job, as they say, and if you fail on this, then the stigma sticks with you. Unfortunately, it's there, but we're here to help you with that handrail that will lead you through the legislation and get you to where you need to be. Right, any questions for myself or Steve while you've got Director of Compliance here? He'll answer any of your questions you may have towards him. If not, feel free to drop me an email as always, and I'll get back to you later on today or tomorrow to discuss any issues that you may have.
Yep. So we've got a few questions. First one is from Naomi Miriam Griffiths. If something like a DBS check expires and I didn't realise it, would I be asked to update documentation by the ICB first, or could this trigger an AML review?
You want me to answer that one, Alex?
Fire away, Steve.
Yeah, the DBS, it's a requirement before you become a member, or before you become a practice license with ICB to have a DBS to make sure that you've no convictions. After that point, it's down to yourself to notify ICB if you get any convictions that would debar you from continuing membership. That's a professional conduct regulation issue. You should inform of any convictions that you receive, which are for any matters like any criminality matters, not just simply driving offences. At the moment in time, there's no requirement to do renew DBS every year or every 2 years or every 3 years. However, it's coming down the line. OPBAS have had a consultation out of that recently, and they're looking at bringing in something around every 5 years. You'd have to renew your DBS and prove to us again that you've got no relevant convictions. ICB may be looking at moving that a little bit further, and we may consider doing our own annual checks on members and working with a DBS provider. So it's under review, but your requirement at the moment is if you get convicted of any offence other than a minor driving traffic offence, you must inform ICB so we can assess your suitability to continue in practice. I hope that answers the question.
Right, and then we've got a question from Claire Kendall. Hi, Claire. Is a custom flowchart good enough to supplement the standard documentation for your policies and procedures if you're a sole trader, or do you need a formal written document?
Go
on, Steve. Sorry, go on.
If that's in relation to risk assessment, you need a proper written risk assessment, identifying what risk you assess your practice is at risk at, and then what mitigating action you're going to take to mitigate those risks. So if you're on the TCSP register, I would expect to see something along the lines that you're on the TCSP register, that you recognise that the TCSP services that you provide have inherent AML risks around with beneficial ownership and that sort of thing. And now you intend to mitigate those risks when it comes to your practice or whole firm risk assessment. And do you want to add to that, Mike, at all?
No, that's covered it. That's fully. And again, if you've got any problems with completing your compliance policy and procedure statement, or any of your risk assessment, there is help on the website. But again, drop me an email. I'm more than happy to talk through these issues. So I know to some people it is daunting talking about risk and mitigation and policies and procedures. But don't worry about these things. Do get in touch with me if there's anything I can help you with.
Just talking about risk assessment again, Mike, we've explained already that the new national risk assessment came into force on the 17th of December. Over Christmas, I've been reading through the document and pulling out the relevant parts which relate to bookkeepers and accountancy professionals. I've got a meeting on the 7th of January with all the other professional body supervisors in the accountancy sector, when we're going to be discussing risk as we see it in the sector. There is a document on the website, ICB website, which you can look at when you're looking at your whole firm risk itself. I'll be updating that document in the next couple of weeks with the outcome of the NRA and also with the outcome of the meeting with the other supervisors on the 7th. So that document will change shortly. Hopefully we might put something out on the next newsletter, but certainly we'll update the document on the ICB website, which highlights to you what risks we see in the sector and what risks there are to the UK as a whole. So watch this space and we'll update that in due course.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question from Lisa De Haas. I think I've pronounced that correctly. Mike, this is my first webinar of yours, so I haven't heard your previous talks. I still have confusion as to what kind of money laundering we're likely to run into and how do we know? I ensure the accounts are 100% and query anything that doesn't make sense. What else can I do, re AML?
Yeah, I think at least in relation to the other webinars I've done, I believe they're all online, aren't they, Alex?
Yeah, so all the episodes of ICB TV are on YouTube, apart from this one, obviously, but this one will be uploaded shortly after this webinar. So, Lisa, I can send you a link. Go onto our YouTube channel. There's a few episodes there, and yeah, that should hopefully answer all your questions. And if not, you can always email.
But Lisa, if you want to give your contact details to Alex, and I can contact you, and we can discuss anything that you wish to discuss in relation to that, rather than going through all again in relation to it.
Great. And then thanks, Mike. And then a question from Richard: is it possible to get a copy of the slides?
Yeah.
Again, this episode will be on our YouTube channel, so you can always go back to that and watch it as many times as you like, Richard. And then so we've got some more questions just come in. So I might have the opportunity to take some self-employed bookkeeping work from a local accountant. Can you please confirm who would be my client, the accountant who has her own AML procedures, or each of her clients?
It all depends on who pays your invoice. If the accountant is paying your invoice, then the accountant is your client, and it's the accountant that you'll have to do your due diligence on. If the clients that you take from the accountants, you're invoicing them separately, then it's the individuals that the accountants has referred you to. They're your clients. So the obligation there is to do the due diligence on those clients. However, if your accountant has already done the due diligence on those clients, you can accept what they call third-party due diligence. If you get a letter from the accountant to say that they have completed all the required due diligence, and you can have a copy of that, you can take that as the due diligence. But it all boils down to who pays your invoice. Who are you invoicing? The person you invoice is your client, and that's the person that needs to go onto AML Online.
Great, thank you. And then a question from Paula Vase Smith. Hi, Paula. What new regulations can we expect for 2021?
Well, Paul, I can answer a few of that if you want, Mike. I mean, we've had some recent amendments to the 5th directive, which came in last year in relation to I think we mentioned before the electronic identification. The new 5th directive, which came into force just at the end of last year, has tightened that up ever so slightly in the wording of it, which we'll put onto the next newsletter, IC newsletter. But it talks about you must make sure when you're doing your electronic identification that you've got a level of assurance to a degree that is necessary for effectively managing and mitigating any risk of money laundering and terrorist financing. So they've tightened the wording up on that. And I forgot what the old wording is, but it's been tightened up a little bit. And we'll put the new wording out there. Regulation 30A, again, that's the requirement to report discrepancies in the beneficial ownership of a corporate client when you're doing your due diligence. You're required to report it to Companies House if you come across a discrepancy. When you're taking a new client on, that's not with old clients, but with your new clients, you are required to retain all the documentation along with your other documentation for a minimum of 5 years after the end of the business relationship. You're also allowed to do reliance in relation to your discrepancy reporting. So if you're acting as for another accountancy body or another professional, you're doing the due diligence for them, they can rely on your discrepancy reporting. And similarly, if you're relying on them, you can rely on their discrepancy reporting. There's also something new in relation to trusts. In relation to the beneficial ownership of companies, there's going to be a trust register, which is up and running at the moment, but it's not publicly accessible at this moment in time. Law enforcement and the FCA, etc., have got access to it, but from I think it's March 2022, the register will go public, and there'll be a requirement on ICB members and all accountancy professionals, again, to report discrepancies in the beneficial ownership of trusts, similar as to what there is with companies at the moment. So you'll have to, again, report discrepancies with trust. Where you're taking a new trust as a client on and you're doing due diligence, you'll have to report beneficial ownership discrepancies in relation to the into the register. There are also issues around sanctions as well, which came into force on the 1st of January, obviously in relation to Brexit. All previous financial sanctions issues were in relation to, a lot of it was in relation to EU sanctions. Of course, we're not part of the EU anymore, so that has now all been transferred into UK legislation only. And there are a few anomalies there. So again, I'll put that out onto the next newsletter that comes around. It's not all that onerous, to be fair, but it's just clarifying the fact that the sanctions regime is a UK sanctions regime rather than an EU sanction regime. So that's something that we'll look at. There is a 6th directive on the horizon, but the UK has looked at it, and the UK goes further in many respects than what the 6th directive does already. So I think the UK considers itself to be more than compliant with the actual 6th directive. So the UK will not be implementing the 6th EU money laundering directive per se. I think that's it at the moment. The economic crime plan, which is a government blueprint for dealing with economic crime for the foreseeable future, that's a 3-year project that goes from 2019 to 2022. There are something like 7 strategic priorities and 52 action points. ICB is involved in a few of these action points and directives and directions, and they're going to review the money laundering regulations again as part of the process, the economic crime plan, and there will more than likely be some new money laundering regulations in the pipeline in the next 12 to 18 months, which could significantly change the landscape when it comes to AML for ICB bookkeepers. But it's all in the planning stage at the moment and all in relation to consultation, but we'll keep members up to speed with what's happening as and when you need to know. Economic crime levy, that's something that's on the horizon at the moment. That was mentioned in the budget last year. As part of the economic crime plan, the Treasury want to implement further changes to the SARS regime and implement further other changes. But what they want to do is they want the regulated sector to pay for these changes. They want people like yourself, bookkeepers and accountants and the banks and building societies, the people who are subject to the regulations, they want them to pay for the changes they want to bring in. So at the moment, they're consulting on an economic crime levy, which will be coming in the next 12 months, I believe. So they're working through the way in which they're going to charge and who they're going to charge and how they're going to implement the charge. I think it's fair to say, though, that everyone who is subject to the MLRs will be required to pay something towards the levy, and it's something like £100 million a year. And I think ICB is going to be tasked to collect this levy from you on behalf of government. So that's on the horizon at the moment. So that'll be a further cost that will come to, unfortunately, to ICB members. I think that's it at the moment, Alex. But if there is anything else I can think of, again, we'll put it into the newsletters.
Great, thank you. Paul Ingram has said, do you have to notify ICB if you have points on your license?
No, we don't. It's only in relation to what they call Schedule 3 offences. That's really speaking offences of dishonesty. It's nothing to do with driving offences. If you get convicted of fraud, money laundering, perjury, theft, anything that's an offence of dishonesty, they're the sort of things you have to tell us about, because it may affect your ability to be a member of the regulated sector. It's not in relation to driving offences or anything like that. It's mainly criminal offences of dishonesty, basically.
Great. And then a question from Richard. If you haven't had a chance to meet a new client, but a passport matches photos on a business website, is it still necessary to meet?
Richard, I would say yes. I would certainly want to see them either face to face, but of course in the current climate, that's an issue, but certainly on a Zoom meeting, because all you're doing is comparing a photograph on a passport with a photograph on another open source. The chances are it's legitimate, but there have been situations where people have used forged passports and a similar situation with that, and a photograph on a website. So I would just say do a meeting with them as and when you can, or certainly do a Zoom one to make sure that that person is a person in the flesh as such.
Great, and that's all the questions for today. Quite nine questions in the Q&A and more in the chat. So that's always nice. So like I said earlier, this episode will be on our YouTube channel in roughly about a couple of hours because it needs to download and everything. Yeah, thanks guys. See you next Monday.
Lovely.
All right.
Thanks very much. Thank you.